Great. Okay, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the first session in our webinar series, Metadata in the WRLC/Alma. My name is Jackie Saavedra. I am the Consortial Network Zone Manager at WRLC, which means I oversee the network zone. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. I will be explaining that later today. This series is being organized and presented by myself and 3 other amazing volunteers who I will give a chance to introduce themselves. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jen Frachel. I'm the Metadata Services Librarian at George Washington University, and next week I will be giving a presentation or the presentation on an introduction to Alma.
Great. Robert?
Hello, I'm Robert Bratton. I'm the head of cataloging and metadata at the Law Library at George Washington University, and I believe I'll be leading the third in this series of 4 things that we're doing.
And Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matthew Bright. I'm Director of Resource Description, also at George Washington University in the main library. I'm going to be covering the 4th session with a bit of help from Jackie, where we'll be talking about some advanced Alma topics that will kind of scratch the surface of and provide some direction on next steps to get further into those.
Great. We are very excited that you could log in and attend this webinar with us today. And as was mentioned, this is the first of 4 planned sessions. These will be held on Zoom Tuesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. for the next 4 weeks. The Zoom link is the same for all 4 sessions. As was previously mentioned, each session covers a specific topic. This first session, I will be presenting on what WRLC catalogers and metadata staff absolutely need to know about our consortium and about the WRLC network zone. If you haven't already noticed, this session is being recorded. All 4 sessions will be recorded and posted on the WRLC YouTube channel. Yes, we do have a YouTube channel, and the links to those YouTube videos will be posted on the intranet and on the metadata Basecamp. There will be a Q&A section at the very end. Robert will be monitoring the chat today. We ask that you either type your question in the chat during or after the presentation, or if you'd like to speak, raise your hand after the presentation and we'll call on you to ask your question. Before I officially begin, I just want to give a little warning. I'm going to be covering a lot in this session, and I'm going to move pretty fast in order to fit everything in 1 hour. The information I present today, the documents I discuss, most of it will be referenced again at one point or another in one of the other 3 sessions. And as I said before, this is going to be recorded. So odds are, if you don't catch something right now, you can watch the recording or it will be repeated in a later session. So to begin, we're starting with the very basics. What is the WRLC? That stands for the Washington Research Library Consortium. This consortium is made up of 9 universities: American, Catholic, Gallaudet, what I like to call the 3 Georges: George Mason, George Washington, Georgetown, Howard, Marymount, and UDC. These universities reside in the DMV area. WRLC has physical headquarters in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, and we have 19 staff, including myself, who work for the headquarters. So where can you find out more about the consortium? There are 2 places you can go. I'm going to put both links in the chat. This first one is essentially a very helpful Welcome to WRLC webpage, gives you more info about the consortium. And this second link is probably the most important link I'll give you today. It's the WRLC intranet. This is a massive site that contains almost anything and everything related to the consortium. When I mentioned earlier today that we'd be posting the recordings on the intranet, I was talking about this. To view this page, you have to log in using your school's credentials if you are not on your school's campus. So what exactly does WRLC offer consortial school libraries? Well, libraries in the consortium use a shared online catalog. This is Alma. We also have what is called the Shared Collections Facility, or the SCF. I will be discussing this in a little more detail later on. We also offer the service desk. I'm going to put in the chat a link to a really helpful page that describes the service desk. Essentially, if you have a question that relates to the consortium, you can put in a service desk ticket and a WRLC staff member will help you. There are two ways to put in a ticket. You can either send an email to this email address that I'm putting in the chat, or you can go to this web page and put in a ticket that way. The consortium also has many committees. Committee members are not only WRLC staff, but also staff in the consortium libraries. These committees make a lot of decisions on projects and policy. Generally speaking, there is one committee member from each school in the consortium, but in some committees, each library in the consortium has a member. Though this isn't always the case, it kind of depends on the committee. If you want to see more info about the WRLC committees, I'm putting a link in the chat. So if you're looking at a hierarchy, at the very top is the Library Directors Council, or LDC. This is made up of the heads of the consortial libraries. Under them is the steering committee, and the name gives you an idea of what they do. They steer the other committees under them by developing and recommending a strategic plan and major initiatives. So there are a good number of committees under the steering committee. The most important one for what we're talking about today is the Metadata Committee. The documents I will be reviewing later in this presentation were written by the Metadata Committee. Other important things to keep in mind about WRLC: we do have a newsletter that is emailed on the 1st of every month. I highly recommend signing up for it, and you can actually do so at this link that I'll put in the chat. If you go to this page, it will list all previously sent newsletters, and there will be a big green subscribe button on the top right corner. And then another thing about WRLC that is very important: Basecamp. We have several different Basecamp projects. This is a great place to ask questions of other consortial staff. I believe I've listed all of them on the slide, but there may be one or two I missed. Some of these projects are more active than others. I can tell you right now, the Metadata Basecamp is very important. It's an integral part of the copy cataloging workflow in WRLC. I'm going to go into more detail later in my presentation, but I just wanted to mention it now and to also let you know that there is more than one Basecamp project for our consortium. So how do you request access to a specific WRLC Basecamp? Well, you send a ticket to the service desk, and our staff can get you set up if you send a ticket. Okay. Now that I've given you a brief overview of the services we provide, I'd like to move on to WRLC in Alma itself. What I'm going to be reviewing now, it will be discussed in more detail by Jen Frachel at our very next session in this series. However, the latter half of my session is reviewing our documentation for cataloging. This documentation uses some very specific terms and vocab. I wanted to give you a brief introduction and an overview of how records are set up in Alma so that you have a better understanding of the documents I go over. You're going to hear me use terms like network zone, or NZ for short, and institution zone, or IZ. What do these terms mean? Well, the network zone is a collaborative network of different institution zones. The NZ centrally manages many aspects of the IZs, things like metadata configuration and resource sharing. As you can see in this image, which I took from Ex Libris, the NZ at the very top is the umbrella for all of the other IZs under it. This is a very basic interpretation just to show you how a network zone works. So in our consortia, the NZ, the top house, is WRLC, and the IZs underneath are the different libraries in the consortia. In our network zone, we actually have 15 different institution zones, obviously more than the 9 schools that are in our consortium, because for many schools, their law libraries have a separate IZ. So you can see, just as an example, the very first 2 bullet points, we have American University, but we also have American University Washington College of Law. So in total, we have 15. There will be 16 IZs soon. The Catholic Law Library is currently migrating to Alma, and their institution zone is set to go live this summer. Now, if you look at the very last bullet point, the shared storage institution IZ is different from the other IZs. This represents the over 3.2 million volumes that are housed at the Shared Collections Facility, the SCF, which you may remember I mentioned earlier. Items at the SCF are cataloged a little differently than other items. Jen will be going over that in more detail at our next session, but I just wanted to let you know now the shared storage institution is something you may see in our Alma catalog. Now that we have a better sense of the network zone and the different institution zones, I'd like to review how this collaborative network is represented in actual Alma catalog records. We have a shared catalog. The records are shared between the institutions, and they exist in the network zone. They're commonly referred to as network zone records, or NZ records. The holdings record and the item record, those belong to the owning institution and exist in the institution zone, but they are linked to the NZ. So as an example here on the screen, we have this book titled Organization Behaviors in Education, published in 2015. In this example, George Mason, George Washington, and Marymount all have this book in their libraries. So these 3 libraries are sharing this bibliographic record. The shared catalog requires us as a consortium to be more collaborative when cataloging and copy cataloging. The NZ records are for all libraries in the consortium, not just one. This is the main reason why the Metadata Committee has written several documents with guidelines and policies describing what is allowed for NZ records and what requires consultation with other schools. And that is what I will be focusing on for the rest of our time together. I will be reviewing 5 different policy documents. I'm going to be going over them one by one with you all. Then I'll be giving you the main takeaways from each document. And then at the very end, I'm going to review how to post on the Metadata Basecamp. So where can you find these policies I'm talking about? Well, they are in the intranet, and I will post the link in the chat. If you go to this link, it'll list all 5 documents. And of course, we're going to start with the very first one, Principles for Working in WRLC's Alma Network Zone. If you want to go straight to this document, I can put that link in the chat as well. And for right now, I'm going to get out of my slideshow, and we're going to go directly to this page. Okay. So all of these documents have a last revised date. This is just here to show you that these documents are not set in stone. They are pretty regularly being revised and looked at. So changes may be made after this presentation. And of all the documents, this is the one that's the most broad. It really just gives very basic principles for working with Alma network zone records. So number 1, do no harm. And then it lists 3 documents to give you an idea of how to edit the NZ records. I will be going over these 3 documents later, so we don't need to do that now. Number 2, when in doubt, ask. Any questions about editing or changing network zone bib records should be posted to the message board of the WRLC Metadata Basecamp. I'll be going over how to post later on. Number 3, most bib records for non-electronic resources that have OCLC numbers and that have been cataloged should reside in the network zone with a linked record in each holding library's institution zone. Exceptions are allowed for rare resources, special collections, and any other records an institution wishes to manage locally. So there are some libraries in our consortium where their special collections or archives have decided to not have their bibliographic records linked to the network zone. This is true for some libraries, but not all. It was a decision that the consortium felt should be made individually by each institution on their own. So for some schools, their rare materials have network zone bib records and others they do not. Number 4, in general, add information applicable to the work, expression, manifestation to the record in the NZ, not your local IZ. So generally, information in the network zone bib record, it should be information that applies to all copies of a book, not just one copy. And number 5, be careful when editing specialized records. For concern PCC, add information but do not change anything in the record unless you are certain there is an error. For records that are for something likely in an institution's special rare archival collections, please see the Making Changes to WRLC Network Zone Bibliographic Records document. So this document I will be going over later, but just know that there are some network zone bibliographic records that are cataloged using very stringent guidelines that are more precise than just RDA or AACR2. Things like CONSER, PCC, DCRM. And for those special records, you want to be extra careful when making any changes. Most likely you'd want to post in the metadata Basecamp. How can you tell if something is PCC? It would be in the 042 field, subfield A. It'll say PCC. And then I think if it's DCRM, that would be in the 040 field, subfield E, I believe. So, okay, we're done with this document. Main takeaways. Do no harm to network zone records. When in doubt, ask. Number 2, only records that A, describe physical items, and B, have OCLC numbers should reside in the network zone. If the record doesn't have both of those things, then it shouldn't be linked to the network zone. Now on to our second document. I'm going to copy and paste the link into the chat. And then we'll go over there. So this is by far the largest document of the 5. And if you're looking in Google Docs, if you click on this little image here, show document outline, you have this nice outline here. And you see that this document is a list of all of our policy statements. The policy statements are organized in alphabetical order. I will only be going over a few of these policy statements. Many of them concern very specific topics in metadata. and don't really apply to everyday cataloging and copy cataloging, I'm only going to cover the policy statements that I feel would benefit the most when using Alma and the metadata editor every day. So I'll first start with the policy statement bibliographic utilities. So the nice thing about this outline, if you click on it, it'll take you directly to that policy statement. All statements have a status, a functional area, and a responsible body. So the policy statement for bibliographic utilities. OCLC is the common bibliographic utility for member libraries. The OCLC number provides a single match point that simplifies loading, maintenance, and other technical services operations in the Alma shared catalog. Below lists some types of bibliographic records that are not required to contain an OCLC number or to have holdings set in WorldCat. These records should not be in the network zone. And then below that, we have a list of the kinds of records that should not be linked to the network zone. In essence, the OCLC number is very important to network zone records. It cuts down on duplicate bibliographic records, and they should always be an OCLC number for every network zone bib record. Okay, now on to the next policy statement. There are some policy statements here. For instance, copy specific metadata and creating and managing local unique data. This information will be covered in more depth in one of the other documents I'll be reviewing later, and that is why I'm not going to go over it right now. So the next one I will go to is descriptive cataloging standards. Records in the network zone should be cataloged according to an established standard. In general, records should be updated appropriately in OCLC before import. If you are able, I know not all staff members can do that. Records may be accepted into the NZ if they are cataloged according to earlier cataloging standards as well. So I would say the majority of network zone records are cataloged either according to AACR2 or RDA, but as long as they are generally cataloged according to an established standard, then that is okay. Next policy, duplicate NZ records. In general, there should be only one NZ record for each manifestation of a given work. Duplicate bib records should be identified and resolved as time and resources allow. There may be exceptions for rare and special materials. Questions about duplicate bib records should be posted to the metadata basecamp. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the OCLC number helps to really curb down duplicate network zone records. What we do not want in our network zone is to have two bib records that have the exact same OCLC number. That is an example of a duplicate that you would want to post about in the metadata basecamp, and you'd want to try to merge those two records together. The next policy statement, here we go, language of cataloging. English is the language of cataloging at WRLC. Records with a cataloging language other than English are discouraged from being in the network zone. Legacy records cataloged in a foreign language should be corrected as time and resources allow. So as a reminder, a bib record will reference two different languages. One, it'll say the language of the actual item, and two, it will say the language of the bib record. So what we're talking about here is the language of the bibliographic record. No matter the language of the actual item, the bibliographic language should always be English. And I believe that would be said in the 040 field, subfield B would say ENG. If you find a record in OCLC that is cataloged in a language other than English and you cannot find another record that describes that same item, then it would be okay to bring that into the network zone, but just know that that should be resolved at a later date. Okay, next is minimal level records. Minimal level records are discouraged from being in the network zone. Minimal or less than full records are allowed when the library lacks the necessary expertise, such as in language or format, to create or upgrade to core or full level records. All OCLC records have an encoded level, and I believe that is in the leader in position 17. If that is blank or has a capital I, that is a full level record. I believe if it has a 7, it's a minimal level record. Now, I do have a link here that I can post in the chat. Yes, so the encoding level of the record is position 17 in the leader. If you want more information about the different levels and their meanings, I'm going to put in the chat a page from OCLC's website that gives you more information. But essentially, network zone bib records should be full level overall. Now we're back to this page. And I believe the last one that I want to go over today is records overlay. Do not use Alma's copy and overlay feature. Instead, use copy and merge in the metadata editor. Use the merge rule created by WRLC, Consortium IZ overlay all fields by local. If merging two bib records would result in changes that require consultation in the two documents listed below, post a message to the message board of the metadata Basecamp. So this is referencing something that will be talked about in more detail in our third session presented by Robert and in our fourth session presented by Matthew. But I just wanted to cover it quickly today. There are going to be times where you want to merge two records. You do not want to use the copy and overlay feature. What that does is completely deletes the old record and replaces it with the new record. Now, the problem with that is you might be deleting some important local fields and some important local information that pertains to another institution in that old record. So you always want to use copy and merge. What that does is it merges both of those two records together, and it will keep the localized information in the old original record. When it says here, use the merge rule created by WRLC, I am 99% sure that all institution zones in our consortium have been configured to use these merge rules in their metadata editor. So that configuration has already been done in the background. In essence, you don't need to worry about using this specific merge rule when using the metadata editor that has already been set for you. The only time that you'd have to be aware of that is if you are creating an import profile and are merging records in batch. And Matthew is going to be going over that in more detail in our very last session. Okay, so we are done with this document. Main takeaways. 1, nitty-gritty policy information can be found in this document. If in doubt about anything, odds are the answer will be here, because remember, there's a lot of information that I didn't go over. 2, network zone records should have an OCLC number, have a cataloging language of English, and be core or full level records. Number 3, whether in the metadata editor or in an import profile, copy and merge should be used, not copy and overlay. Okay, on to our third document. Fields that can be deleted in the NZ without consultation. So now with these last 3 documents, we're getting into very specifics about copy cataloging. And I will be going to this document now. All right. Here we essentially have a list of fields that can be deleted without consultation. That means it can be deleted without posting about it in Basecamp. This document doesn't talk about editing fields or adding fields. That is in another document. This one is just fields that can be deleted. And the first two are essentially two different access points that you can get rid of if you'd like. Subfield 2 NAB or subfield 2 NBC, and access points from the book industry study group vocabularies. 3, access points that duplicate other controlled access points. In this example, we have two fields that are exactly the same except for the indicator. So you could delete that duplicate field and just keep one. Number 4, access points that are just translations of corporate names or titles. Number 5, non-local 9XX fields generated on import. If you haven't noticed already, when you import a record from OCLC into Alma, it will add these fields like the 938, 948, 994. You can delete these. We don't really use them in our network zone. Number 6, a field that duplicates the function of another preferred field. So sometimes in some OCLC records, you'll have two fields where the numbers are different, but the values are exactly the same. In this particular example, language information concerning the language of the item used to be written in the 500 field, and then they changed it to 546. In some records, you have both.
Jackie, we just lost your audio.
Hello?
You're back.
Oh, great. Okay. I don't know what happened. All right. Let me just make sure that everything is plugged in. Okay. All right. In that case, I will get back to, okay, number 6, a field that duplicates the function of another preferred field. Number 7, a field that applies to a non-WRLC institution. Again, these are fields that you'll find in some OCLC records. The MARC code in subfield 5 references a non-WRLC library, and this information concerns their own specific copy. These can be deleted. Number 8, 856 fields with URLs that no longer work, URLs for paid resources, and non-access URLs. You can keep 856 fields with URLs for tables of contents that are freely accessible. And last, non-local OXX fields that exist in OCLC master records like the 029 and 084 fields. One thing I want to make clear about this list, these are a list of fields that you can delete without consulting. You do not have to delete them. You are not obligated to delete them because I know that may be a lot of work in your everyday copy cataloging workflow. So we're not saying that these absolutely must be deleted whenever you edit a record. It's just saying that you can delete them. And if you do, you don't have to post about it in Basecamp. So main takeaways. Fields can be removed from a network zone record as part of a copy and merge. The definitive list of what can be deleted without consultation is in this document. Number 2, if you wish to remove a field not listed in this document, post on Basecamp. Now on to our 4th document. This is perhaps the most important when copy cataloging network zone records. I will be copying this link and putting it into the chat. and then we'll go take a look. Making changes to WRLC network zone bibliographic records. There are two lists in this document. The first list shows you the changes that can be made without consulting the other schools. These changes can be made either when you're editing the record individually or when you're merging both records. Number one, any deletions listed in the document I just talked about. Number two, if your institution has the only holding on the bib record, you may make any changes so long as they conform to the WRLC metadata principles and policies. So remember what I said earlier. The basic rules for NZ records is that they must describe a physical resource, they must have an OCLC number, the cataloging language must be English, and it must be full level. If that record meets those 4 criteria and your school is the only one with holdings, then you can make any other changes you want without consulting other schools because there are no other schools to consult. Number 3, corrections of obvious typos and mistakes in fields and subfields that are not transcribed. So as an example, let's say in the 300 field, someone misspelled pages, then obviously that's a typo. You can change that without consulting anyone. Number 4, adding new fields so long as they're valid and appropriate for the NZ. So you can add information to a network zone record as long as it applies to all copies of that item. Number 5, making changes or additions that update a record to current metadata standards. Example, upgrading a record from AACR2 to RDA if the changes don't involve major things like changing the main entry. Number 6, updating authorized access points to current forms. Authority headings are being updated all the time, and so you can update them in individual bibliographic records without consulting others. Number 7, upgrading a regular contents note to an enhanced contents note. So as you can see, the enhanced note has extra subfields like T and subfield R. 8, upgrading a mark tag to the current standard. And that's something that I briefly mentioned when reviewing the other document about deleting fields. For example, in the first one here, the language of an item used to be written in the 500 field. Now it's written in the 546. So you can edit that and update it without consulting anyone. And number 9, changing anything in transcribed elements if you have the piece in hand. So as you may know, there are certain fields in the bibliographic record that have to be transcribed from the item. The most important one would be the 245 field, the title. So if you see that the title is incorrect in the record and it's different from the title that's actually in the item and you have that item in your hand, you can change that, update it without consulting on Basecamp. So now we have the list of the kinds of changes that should not be done without consultation. These changes can result as an edit or as part of merging, but they should not be done without consulting. Number 1, any deletions not listed in the fields that can be deleted without consultation document. Number 2, major changes to the record that are not related to upgrading it to current metadata standards. Number 3, changing anything in transcribed elements if you do not have the piece in hand. Number 4, changing anything in a record that is for something likely in an institution's special rare archival collections. And here we have a few examples of how you can spot those. So in the 040 field, subfield E, you would have one of these acronyms Anything produced or published before 1900 is probably also a rare manuscript or item. And then one-of-a-kind resources like manuscripts. Number 5, any job or automated process run on a set or sets of network zone bib records, you'd want to just post one message to the message board saying that you would like to run this automated job that could alter these records. Of course, this does not apply if you're running jobs to manipulate your local institution zone fields. Matthew is going to go over how to run jobs on sets in our 4th session. Number 6, making changes or additions that update a record to current metadata standards if they involve major changes like changing the main entry. And number 7, when closing a serial or integrating resource record, please alert other institutions that have holdings, and then you'd want to follow this list of changes. And here we have a whole list of changes that need to be made if you're closing a serial record. So the main takeaways for this document: if your institution is the only one with holdings, you may make any changes you'd like without consultation, so long as they follow the general network zone bib record policies document. Number 2, you can update metadata standards, update access points, edit obvious typos, and edit transcribed elements if you have the item in hand, all without consultation. Number 3, you must consult institutions with holdings if you are editing transcription elements without the item in hand, if there will be any major changes not related to all of those in number 2, if you are running a batch job on NZ records, or if you are closing a serial record. Now on to our very last document, formatting copy-specific metadata. I will put the link in the chat, and then we'll take a look. So this document is organized in 2. The first is copy-specific metadata in holdings records. So some schools have decided they like to put this information in the holdings record, and this is where you could put information like this. In the holdings record, it would be 541 field, 561, 562, 563. And we do have examples here of the kinds of information you may want to put there. And then the second part of this document lists copy-specific metadata in bibliographic records. Now, there are times where you may want to add information about your institution's specific copy in the network zone bib record because you would like all patrons in the consortium to know about your item. You would want them to know that your copy is signed by the author, or you may want them to know that your copy was donated by so-and-so. In that case, you would just want to follow the rules and guidelines set up in this document. So 1, you can add a local call number to a network zone record, the 099 field. You can add a varying form of title in a 246 field, as long as it includes a subfield G or subfield I with the organization name, and it includes a subfield 5 with the MARC organization code. And here we have 2 different examples of what that would look like. And then for the other fields that are listed here, almost all of them say that you must include a subfield 3 with your organization name and a subfield 5 with MARC organization code. So here we have a list of all of the different 5XX fields that can be used to hold copy-specific information, along with examples of what that would look like in the bib record. 59X fields, 655 fields. Again, you need subfield 3 and subfield 5. Added entry fields, and certain 9XX fields. These all need subfield 3 and subfield 5 with the mark code. So main takeaways from this document. Copy-specific metadata can be added to holdings records. These specific fields and formats that are allowed are in this document. Number 2, copy-specific metadata can be added to network zone records if fields are intended for public display and access. These specific fields and formats allowed are in this document. Okay, we are almost done. I've gone over 5 documents, and now what I would like to do before the Q&A is to go over how to post on the metadata Basecamp. Okay, so how do you request access to Basecamp? You put in a service desk ticket. One thing you want to do when you are setting up your account, obviously you want to put your name, but you should add your institution initials to the end of your name so that others can see what institution you're from, and so that they can contact you if they need to get information about a merge request. When you're posting in Basecamp, you want to choose the correct category, include necessary information like network ID, OCLC number, and the list of all institutions that have holdings attached to that record. And then you want to notify the correct people. And at this point, I think it would make sense if I showed how to do this in Basecamp itself. So I am going to go to my Basecamp. So as you see here, this is the WRLC Basecamp, and these are all of the projects that I have access to. I'm going to go to metadata. Over here, we have the message board. This is where you post about Alma merge requests. And we have some pretty good examples here already of other people doing this, but I can just show you a test message. So you'd click on new message. Oh, I already did this earlier today, so I think it remembered this post that I never put up there. So when I mentioned pick the correct category, it's up here. You want to choose the correct category. So most of the time, if you wanted to consult other schools about merging 2 records together, you'd want to choose Alma merge request. And then in the title, you want to put the network ID. All network IDs in Alma end with 4101. So you'd want to put the network ID, you'd want to put the OCLC number for the record, and then you'd want to list all of the institutions that have holdings attached. And let's say in this example, it's only AU that has other holdings. In the body of the post, you'd like to, restate the network ID OCLC number, say that you'd like to merge this record. If there are specific questions you may have about this record, then you just want to talk about it here. And then, of course, down here, Basecamp is automatically set to notify everyone who is enrolled in this project whenever you post a message. But if you're doing a merge request, we do ask you to change this so that you are only notifying people associated with institutions that have holdings attached to this record. So how do you change it? Well, at this point, I would click only the people I select. And then we get this pop-up here, who should be notified? It's automatically set to select everyone. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose select no one. And at this point, nobody is selected. Now, for this example, only AU has holdings. So at this point, I'm going to scroll down and look for anyone with AU as part of their name and check mark them. And this is why it's important to add your institution's initials at the end of your name so that when someone has a question geared towards one of your institution's records, you'll receive an email saying, hey, there's been a new metadata Basecamp post. So in this example, I'm trying to find all the AU people. I'm sure I'm missing some. But anyways, I'm going to click Save Changes. And now you see it's different. Only notify these 6 people, and these are the 6 people that you notify. And then you would click Post this message. The message would be posted. These people that you selected would be notified. And then once you get a response from all of the other institutions, you would go back to that record and merge. And then what you would do, let me see if I can change my view here a little bit. What you'd want to do is you'd want to archive the message once you're done updating the record. And I believe you do that by going to the original message board post, clicking on this little image of the 3 dots, and then you'd click archive. So that's the basics of posting on Basecamp. All right, that was everything that I wanted to cover today. And we still have about 8 minutes for Q&A. So I think Robert is going to take a look at the chat. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat.
Thank
and then
you,
I'll
Jackie.
see. Yeah.
Not seeing any questions yet.
All right.
Maybe to give people a chance to do that, there's a couple things I wanted to mention.
Of course, please.
And one of them is, if you're new to WRLC and you work with metadata, the metadata committee would like to encourage you to go over and read all of these documents. And honestly, speaking for myself, I actually try to go back periodically and reread them, because especially for things you don't work with all the time, you might not be remembering something 100% correctly. Also in the big document, the policy document, most of them say finalized. That does not mean it cannot be revised. It just means that's almost more of a relic from when we were laboriously discussing them in meeting after meeting and developing them. So finalized does not mean it cannot be revised or revisited if someone wants to suggest something like that. Basecamp, they're called projects, but don't let that throw you off, because Basecamp software was created as a way for people on a project to collaborate, but we're not really using it that way unless you want to think about what you do every day as a never-ending project. And as far as the fields that can be deleted without consultation, if people want to delete some of those, but they don't want to do it one by one every time because it's a pain, you can actually write what I've done. You can write a normalization rule and you can run it on an individual record, and it can go through and say, is there a field with this in it? If the answer is yes, get rid of it. And it just gets rid of them all at once. So that's all I wanted to add. And we do have a question from Cindy. Is there an easy reference list somewhere of the WRLC institution codes that go in the 5 subfield?
You know, I don't actually think so. Does anyone else know?
Yeah, I think it's the MARC institution code that goes in there, right? It's not the OCLC symbol, it's the MARC institution code. And there is a site where you can look that up. So I will, I just put the link in the chat to that. So you can search by code or search by organization to find the code.
Okay.
But it would probably be fairly easy to come up with a list and have that in our local documentation. That's something we could probably do. Yeah, that would be pretty easy.
The other thing that I was thinking, if I might jump in for a second,
of course,
is talking about copy-specific metadata. And so, Jackie, you gave a great explanation of copy-specific metadata that's included in the shared network zone bibliographic record. But you can add all the copy-specific metadata that you want in whatever way you want to, or at least whatever way your institution wants you to, in local fields. So Alma calls those local extensions now. In the metadata editor, that will be represented by a little like house icon next to the field. And in some places, if you look at the record, it's represented by a subfield 9 that says local. And so any of those can be added and do not need a subfield 5 or anything special. It's just if you wanted to add it into the shared network zone record, which would then be visible by all institutions in the consortium, that you would want to follow those formatting copy-specific metadata guides.
Yes, and I believe Robert will be going over how to add local extensions in the metadata editor in our third session. And just know that that information in those local fields, local extensions, if you have your Primo set up to show those fields, your own patrons will be able to see that information, but patrons in other schools in the consortium will not see that information if it's in the local extension.
Yes, like so many other things in Alma Primo, things don't necessarily mean what we think they should mean. That's why we ended up making a distinction in our documentation between local and copy specific, because local in Alma speak is a field that Alma will let you create as a local field. So if you say, I want to add a 500 node with local information, you can't do that because I don't believe Primo will let you create a quote unquote local 500, but there are fields that it will.
So I don't see any questions or raised hands. All right, in that case, that is the end of our first session. I know that was a lot of information. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of these topics are going to be talked about again in the next 3 sessions. And if you feel like you didn't catch everything, this will be recorded and it will be posted soon. I don't know of a timeline right now, but I don't think it'll take too long for it to be posted. All right, everyone, thank you so much.